Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I have been long awaiting this day. I finally cornered John Sapichetti. He has nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Lakers are eliminated. They have been for a few days now. Sap took a vacation to try to get rid of this conversation. He tried to talk about other games, but I will not allow it anymore. Sap, the Lakers are done. LeBron James' streak of reaching the finals is over. How do you feel today?
I'm actually okay with it. Their season ended on
Denial
a
is the first
Thursday.
stage of grief.
Yes, exactly. And then drinking is the second stage afterwards. I mean, it's not as fun not having LeBron in the postseason. I think the league would agree with that. The ratings will probably be impacted somewhat. I mean, you look at the Western Conference now, it's Clippers, Suns, Nuggets, Jazz, not exactly four historic franchises. One of them is going to go to the finals this year, and they're all really good teams, but they're not the brand of the Lakers or have the cachet of LeBron James as its lead player. It just never looked right once Anthony Davis went down back early in the season. When Davis went down originally, the Lakers were 21-6. LeBron looked like the leading MVP candidate. Anthony Davis didn't get off to a really great start this year, but you would expect he would play himself into shape. He got hurt. LeBron got hurt a few weeks later. They didn't come back till late in the season. By then, they were trying to get into the top six so they wouldn't have to play in the play-in tournament. They won the play-in game against Golden State in, just a really incredible game. And fortunately for them, they won that game because Memphis may have beaten them if Memphis played them, because Memphis was playing really good basketball at that point. And we know LeBron and Anthony Davis were never quite right. In a sense, if you're looking forward to next year, it probably made the most sense that they lost in the first round. I mean, if you're not going to win the title at this point, and look, his legacy is clearly established, LeBron's is, and I know the LeBron haters will say, hey, he got knocked out in the first round. Well, Jordan got knocked out in the first round 3 times too. So, we can get over all that stuff.
I still put Jordan ahead of him, but people do seem to conveniently forget about that.
Yeah, and then Jordan also didn't make the playoffs in 2 years at Washington. And they'll say, well, he was just there to maybe buy the table. Well, then don't play. Like, I mean, you can't have it both ways and say he only had. So according to Jordan fans, he had 6 years. The 6 years he won the titles, nothing else happened in the other years, which would be news to everyone because he was still the best player in the sport for many of those years. It just he didn't win the title. Like, winning titles isn't easy. So, but looking forward to next year, it's probably best that they get eliminated earlier. It gives them a longer offseason for LeBron to get healthy and for Anthony Davis to get off his ass and get in tip-top shape. And Kevin Garnett, who you love and I respect immeasurably as a player, called him out on this and said Anthony Davis is going to have to work harder. He's been in the league essentially 9-10 years. He's won a championship, which is great. He's a talented player, but he's never been durable. It's always been these lingering injuries that have kept him out. And by the time the season ended, Jet, he was dealing with 4 different things: an Achilles, a calf, a groin, a knee. I mean, I was just waiting for the hip to go at some point. It felt like he was in an old age home, but he's going to have to work to be in better condition going forward as he approaches his late 20s. And he's a big man. He also is a big man who grew into his body late in life. And we talked about this last week. Like, I don't know what impact that has on a person when you go from 6'3" to 6'11" in one summer. Like, does that set you up to be more susceptible for these type of nagging injuries that your body never really catches up with that? I don't know. But I think a lot of this is lack of conditioning. And Kevin Garnett said it, and we know Kevin Garnett has no filter. He's not afraid to say anything about anyone. And I agree 100% with him. Just when Garnett says it compared to me, it has a lot more traction. And I said at that time that the Lakers should reach out to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was the most durable big man in the history of the sport, and many believe the greatest big man in the history of the sport. He would play every single game, minutes, more minutes, and he would still be effective at the end of the postseason, carrying 7'2", 240 pounds and taking a pounding. I mean, when Kareem played, Jet, every center, their only line of defense was to be physical with him, whether it was Bob Lanier or Dave Cowens or Willis Reed or whoever. Anthony Davis doesn't face that type of physicality, but Kareem is someone that I would think Anthony Davis respects. And if Kareem says, this is what you have to do, you have to change your diet, you have to be more flexible. I'm not saying you have to be in the weight room 3 hours a day. We don't need you to look like Dwight Howard did in his prime with Orlando, but we need you to be more flexible and just more durable. And a lot of that has to do with diet. Kareem was way ahead of the curve during his career when it came to nutrition, exercise, peace of mind. If Kareem can get into Anthony Davis's head, then Anthony Davis can fulfill really his promise. And that's when the Lakers are at their best, because as great as LeBron is, I don't think he can carry an inferior team to the finals anymore like he did in Cleveland on several occasions. I think he needs help. And Anthony Davis was supposed to be that co-star, and he was the first year in LA, but not the second year. So the Lakers have two great players. A longer offseason means they should be healthier next year. LeBron's going to show up into camp in shape because that's what he does. Hopefully that rubs off on Anthony Davis, whether it comes from LeBron or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Then they've got their two pillars. The rest of their roster, they need a lot of tweaking, and maybe more than tweaking, Jed. Their offseason moves a year ago didn't work. None of those guys stepped up. Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, I think were disappointments. It didn't work. I mean, they had no support for LeBron James in that series against Phoenix, and he wasn't up to task either. I'm not going to lay all the blame on the likes of Kyle Kuzma and KCP and the rest of them. I mean, LeBron had to play better in that series for them to win, and he didn't. But they're going to have to try to figure out a way to improve that roster. And it starts really, Jet, they need outside shooting, because that's always been what LeBron James needs, or at least things that enhance what his game is all about. So they've got to go out, get some knockdown shooters, which they don't have, get Anthony Davis healthy and in the best condition, and then they'll contend again next year. I don't think that that's too much to ask for. But I do worry about LeBron's injury, and maybe Father Time is, tapping on the shoulder, and he's still going to be a great player, but can he carry a team of inferior players like he did in Cleveland on multiple occasions? I don't think so. I don't even know if his mindset's into that, because he's naturally a guy who likes to pass rather than score. So get him some scorers, or at least some shooters to complement him. Kind of like Trae Young has in Atlanta. That as great as Trae Young is, and of course he's 14 years younger than LeBron, but he's got a lot of great shooters that enhances his game. That's what the Lakers need.
Yeah, so let me respond to a couple of things you said, Sep. I do agree with you and Kevin Garnett that Anthony Davis needs to get in better shape. I'm not talking about, I think his conditioning is probably not too bad, because he's on an NBA team. It's hard to have all those amenities around you and have terrible conditioning.
Right.
I think the guy, Kareem, is a great suggestion. The guy I'd have him work with is Tom Brady. Do the TB12 method. The pliability thing seems to be working pretty damn well for Tom. And so maybe that's, maybe Brady can work out some sort of break into the basketball market with that sort of endorsement. I think it could be mutually beneficial. The diet, we know how insane Tom is about the diet thing. So maybe that's a route he goes. My concern is now with the injuries for Anthony Davis, because this isn't just a Laker thing. This was a Pelican thing too. Are they cumulative now? Mm-hmm. Have they all added up to the point where he can, even if he does makes these changes, have they all added up and taken too much of a toll to the point where he's never going to be able to get through a season fully healthy? Because I think that's a real possibility.
Sure.
You can heal, but there's still, you never are. Some things never fully heal. I'm not saying that that's the case necessarily with Anthony Davis, but he's had a lot of injuries in his career, and he hasn't played for that long. And so I guess I would wonder, Sap, if that train has left the station at this point, and he can be able to put through seasons where he's playing every game, or has these injuries just taken too much of a toll on him where you have to load manage him the whole season because you can't be able to do it.
And then when you're load managing, and if LeBron's not quite the player he used to be, then you're the 7 seed again. And you can get to the finals from the 7 seed, although no team's ever done that. I think Houston's the lowest seeded team to make it to the finals and actually win a championship in 1995 when they were the 6th seed.
And 8 seeds made it. The Knicks were
I know that was
year.
in the lockout year. Yeah, that's one I kind of either blocked out of my mind or just forgot. Or
that's a big asterisk.
Shows it right. Sure. That's the thing. In a real season, though, it's difficult to get there. And then we saw what the Knicks were in the finals. I mean, San Antonio took care of them. But yeah, it's not that easy to do. And the West is pretty deep. I don't think the West is top heavy. You look at the 4 teams that are left in the West. I think you could throw a blanket over them. Either of them, of those 4 teams, could win. It's depth more than, the Lakers don't have to get through Brooklyn and Philly, Milwaukee, who, although Milwaukee hasn't really shown themselves quite well in the series against Brooklyn, but I mean, you could make a case those have been the 3 best teams this year. But the West is deeper. So if you're a 7 seed, now you're playing a damn good team as a 2 seed, then you have to beat a 3 seed, then you have to beat maybe a 1 seed to get to the final. So, load managing is great, but, Davis is going to have to work hard in the offseason. And that's the benefit, if there is such a thing, of losing early in the playoffs, because now your offseason is longer. I mean, what's the point? Look, I would have loved to see LeBron play more. Get to the conference finals. That is a better season than losing in the first round. But with all he's accomplished, it's about championships, and the best chance for them to win a championship next year is to at least have a longer offseason to get those 2 guys right. And you would hope that Rob Pelinka or LeBron James, whoever makes the roster moves, understands that we got to go get, probably LeBron. And actually, that would work out, because I think he knows what he needs, and he needs shooters. And I don't think Dennis Schroeder is going to stay there. He's a free agent at the end of the year who cost himself a ton of money by not accepting a 4-year, $84 million deal from the Lakers. He's not going to get anything close to that right now. And you just have to try to find. You got to find a disgruntled superstar, maybe, and then you try to. That's really what the league is about now, right?
Yeah.
Because if Brooklyn's going to have a huge, there's a difference between Brooklyn's big 3 and some other team's big 3. No one else has a big 3 like Brooklyn. Like the Lakers could have that if they get a 3rd guy, but he's got to be comparable or close enough to someone like Kyrie Irving. There's no free agent out there this year. I mean, unless Kawhi opts out and joins the Lakers, then that's a different discussion. I mean, the guy I like a lot is Kyle Lowry, but is he really a big 3? I mean, he's 36. He's kind of he's a player who we both respect, but he's not necessarily a future Hall of Famer. You see what I'm saying? When you talk about a big 3, a real big 3, they've got to be Hall of Famers. And, who's that guy that the Lakers
certainly
in their prime?
He's not in his prime anymore. He's still excellent, but he's not his prime.
He's excellent, but he's not his prime. And like Devin Booker, I think, is a guy that you could qualify as that because he's in his prime.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. So where do they go to get that 3rd wheel, and then you move? I mean, what do they do with Andre Drummond? I mean, he just didn't seem to fit in. And then Drummond's a guy who's like would have been great in the NBA 10, 12 years ago, maybe not now. I mean, he still rebounds, which is nice, but what else does he do?
They might bring him back because I think you can get him for cheap. I don't think that he's, people are going to be banging down doors to sign him to big money. My questions for you, Sap, as a LeBron guy and as a Laker guy, are two main questions. The first one, how much of this series loss to the Suns can you put on LeBron?
A good portion of it, sure. I mean, because I'm so used to him just taking over. Like when it got to game 4, let's not forget the Lakers had an 11-point lead in the second quarter of game 4. At that point, I think we were texting each other saying, this is going to go 5 games, maybe 6. Lakers will take care of business. And then Davis got hurt in the second quarter, and then LeBron didn't get aggressive in the third quarter. And at times he doesn't get aggressive enough. And again, maybe it's the fact that the guy's 36 years old, who's played a ton of minutes. I think he's played the 3rd most minutes in league history. Maybe all of that is starting to wear on him, and he can't do what he used to do, which was, go into the attack mode where, he'll get you 18 points in a quarter to go with 4 rebounds and 4 assists, which 18, 4, and 4 is not even a bad game for someone. It's a quarter for him. So no, he deserves part of that blame. I don't know why he's taking as many 3-pointers, other than the fact that in games 5 and 6, they were down. It felt like 25 points before I sat down to watch the game. So, he was forced to take more threes, and he was okay on 3-point attempts in the series. Nothing great. He's not a great 3-point shooter. I'd like to see him closer to the basket. Maybe shies away from that because he's not shooting all that well from the free throw line. No, he deserves. He didn't play well. I mean, this is a guy.
Sap, that
was his worst. That was his worst series since the finals against Dallas in 2011. Because since then, you can't tell me that there's been anybody remotely close to him as a postseason player in the league. Not even within shouting distance of what LeBron's accomplished since 2011. That's a decade ago. But in this series, no, he wasn't good at all.
Yeah, 35% from the 3-point line, 56%, just under 57% from the free throw line in this series. Didn't score, didn't have a single 30-point game, averaged 23.3 for the series. Especially, that number is surprising to me, the points per game number, especially with Davis out. You would expect, okay, he was going to be able to score a lot. So I do think I don't think Phoenix was I think they're a very good team. I don't think they were a good enough team to say that LeBron definitively couldn't have beaten them by themselves, especially if you're looking at past performances of LeBron. So I don't know if this was, he just said, Davis is out, screw it. I'm not going to put in a full effort to this because it's not worth it. We're not going to win the title anyways. Or if he's actually getting old and he just can't play up to the level he is. I don't know which one of those it is.
I wonder if he's distracted too. I mean, look, he's been at this for a long time, and it weighs on you mentally. To the point Michael Jordan took a couple of breaks. Was gone for almost 2 years after winning his first 3, and then was gone 3 years after winning his next 3. And I think physically it wears on him, but mentally it wears on him too. He's got a movie coming out in the summer. He's now involved in a tequila business. I mean, in the past, LeBron wouldn't really tweet during the postseason, and I think before Game 6, he was tweeting out that he was so happy that his tequila company won an award. We know that he violated protocol at some point in that series. So, I mean, these are all things that did happen. And look, you can love a player, respect him and all of that. And I do, LeBron. And I actually like him as a person more than anything because of all the things he does. But you can criticize him. And I do. I think you have to. You can't come out here and just say, well, no, I mean, he just, whatever. You have to criticize him. So maybe he's distracted. And again, I think he went to LA as much for lifestyle and business as anything. Because when he went there, the roster wasn't all that good. He was able to get Anthony Davis. They did win a title. So he delivered that. That's what the job was. And maybe they can win another one. Maybe he's distracted. Maybe Father Time's tapping on that shoulder. He's not quite what he used to be. Because is Phoenix that much better than, say, the Pacers or the Celtics from 3 years ago?
Probably not.
And he beat those teams pretty much single-handedly, right?
Yes.
I mean, both in 7 games. When he got to the finals in 2018, I don't think I've ever seen him play any better, including Game 1 when he went 51-8-8 against Golden State. But good luck beating that team. But, I mean, Phoenix, I would say, is probably a little bit better than the Celtics and Indiana.
If but they
not
are,
by that
it's
much.
Negligible.
It's negligible, and it shouldn't have led to back-to-back blowouts. I mean, games 5 and 6 were pathetic. They were painful to watch right from the get-go. So that's where you see the difference. And is that Laker roster any worse than the Cleveland roster in 18? It's probably comparable. It's not very good, taking Anthony Davis out of the equation, which you had to in games 5 and 6 and the second half of Game 4. So I think he could certainly play better. He'll come back. He's motivated. But again, I think a lot of this is mental because the guy's been scrutinized for over 20 years. At some point, you need to decompress. And I think that's why the longer offseason probably will help him more than hurt him. Get away from it, work on your body, come back. And maybe people, I shouldn't say this because whenever LeBron James is involved, they're always the favorite to go to the finals, no matter what the situation is. So there'll be pressure on him, as there always is. There'll never not be pressure on LeBron James. But the key to this franchise is getting those two guys healthy and then finding shooters for them going forward. And that's up to the front office.
Yeah. Okay. So my second to last question before we can move on and you can be done with having to talk about this, Seth.
I feel like I'm in my psychiatrist office.
Yeah. You are. The spotlight's on you right now.
What's your fee? What do you charge?
I'm very cheap.
Okay,
I just do it for the love of the sport. How do we look back on the bubble title now with the fact that the Heat were easily trounced in the first round? The Celtics were easily trounced in the first round. The Nuggets are still alive, and the Lakers were pretty easily defeated in the first round too. Do we look back on it with a little bit of an asterisk now?
No, I think it's actually maybe a bigger accomplishment because you look at that, the level of competitiveness and buy-in to go through that was at a very high level, right? I mean, you were essentially quarantined for what, 3.5 months, roughly, of 100 days. And some teams just couldn't deal with it. We know the Clippers couldn't deal with it. Paul George talked about it. The Bucks didn't want to deal with it. So the Lakers were able to persevere. And look, they didn't have to face the Clippers in the playoffs, which we all thought was going to happen. That's not their fault. I mean, do we hold the championship in 1981 against Larry Bird because he played the 40-42 Houston Rockets in the finals? No.
It's not so much the opponent, Sap, is that the two things I think that really worked in the Lakers' favor was the no distractions for LeBron thing. I mean, he was so none of the LA stuff. I think that played a big factor into it. He had nothing to distract him at all. And two, because of the time
except that they weren't sure they were going to even have the bubble. And he was kind of the guy that everybody looked at and said, should we do this or shouldn't we do this?
Yeah, but once they got in there, I'm saying there were no distractions.
Right. But he was bought in, though.
The bigger thing to me and why they won. I'm not going to say take down the banner or anything like that. But this is why I look at it a little differently. The period of time between when the league shut down from COVID to the start of the bubble, I think is the best thing that ever could have happened to the Lakers because they were able to get fully healthy. Because of Davis's injury history and LeBron's age, I don't know that they would have been able to go on the same run in the playoffs had there just been consecutive games and you went right into the playoffs as opposed to that huge layoff in between where he was able to get right. I think that's a fair question to ask.
It is a fair question to ask. The only thing is the Lakers weren't load managing last year. It was the LA Clippers that were load managing. It was Brooklyn that didn't have Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving shut things down pretty quickly. LeBron and Anthony Davis were load managing a year ago. They were playing pretty much. Well, LeBron was playing every game. I think Anthony Davis only missed a handful of games.
Right, so I'm saying it could have caught up to them in the playoffs had the playoffs been a normal schedule.
It could have, but they weren't hurt. So, if they had just continued on, there was about a month left in the regular season. And look, when the thing hit and we shut down for several months, they were the best team in basketball. They had just beat the Clippers, the Celtics, and the Bucks in about a 1 week period. So everyone was on board that they were the best team. When they came back for the bubble, they were the favorite to win the title. So, yeah, I mean, sure, but everybody else had that opportunity as well. I mean, don't you think that would have helped the Clippers, who Kawhi was being load managed anyway, that he could really load manage it for 3.5 months, and it didn't seem to help him at all. So yeah, I mean, every championship is different. I don't think the championship that he won in Cleveland will ever be surpassed because it was in Cleveland, a place where a team hasn't won a championship of any sort since 1962. Like, that's insane. The Browns, the Indians, or the Cavaliers had never won a title since before I was born.
Right.
So that's the one that's always going to be number one. And probably the two Miami titles are pretty equal. The one in the bubble, yeah, there'll be people who weigh in and say, well, no, that was the most difficult to win because it was so outside the box. And then other people say, well, the time leading up to it was beneficial for LeBron James and for Anthony Davis. But, the Houston Rockets had a break too. Wouldn't that help James Harden and Russell Westbrook or any other team in the postseason? And especially the Clippers, who were in load management mode with Kawhi Leonard. So
yeah, but nobody has as much mileage on them as LeBron and Anthony Davis as a history of injuries. So I think it's a fair question to ask, Sap.
It is. No, it's out there.
With how putrid the effort was from Boston and Miami, and who were the Eastern Conference finalists. It just looked like
kind of impacts.
It almost had to feel more of a tournament, Sap, of a one-off tournament as opposed to a true playoffs.
But because there's no travel involved. But that's right. Every team wasn't traveling, and does it benefit the Lakers? I don't know. If they're in the finals against Miami, there's a lot of travel there, but both teams are traveling, and they travel first class, and it's not as if they're taking trains back and forth to different
I think
darkened arenas. So
if there was no pandemic and it was a normal playoffs, I think that Milwaukee probably gets to the finals last year. I don't think Miami would have beaten them had they had to go to Milwaukee.
Right. So it would have been Milwaukee Lakers finals. The way we see Milwaukee in the postseason, I think the Lakers would win. They figured out a way to build a wall against Giannis. Who knows? But no, there's going to be that discussion out there, and I'll embrace it and deal with it, and agree that the possibility does exist. But again,
this performance didn't help the narrative.
No,
them being bounced in the first round.
But all of these teams struggled, right? Miami and Boston getting bounced easily in the first round. No shame for the Celtics because they were just playing a far superior team, and Miami didn't appear to be engaged or competitive against Milwaukee. And now we see the Lakers losing in the first round, and now Denver, I think, is going to get bounced in the second round, because I think the cumulative effect of the late season last year is going to start to weigh on Denver. But I also think that the impact is more this year, that because those teams got to the conference finals, that they just had such a shorter offseason that, teams like Phoenix, who didn't even make it to the postseason last year, had a long offseason. Then they were able to acquire, obviously, Chris Paul, which kind of put them over the top. But yeah, you can look at all of this in any way you want. I mean, he still has 4 titles. And like I said,
or
Bird
does he have
in
3
81,
titles and a bubble title?
No, he has 4 titles. I mean, I know I saw this the moment after he won that title. Even my nephew, who likes LeBron but is more of a Durant guy, which we've had discussions, and I'm still trying to get that out of his mind. He's holding things against Durant now. Actually, his favorite player, non-Celtic player, is Dame Lillard, like you. That's his favorite non-Celtic. But he sent me a tweet that was out there that LeBron has no titles. That the first one was a strike shortened season. I think they only played 66 games in 2011, 2012. So we're holding that against him.
I'm on board with that. Eliminate
you're on board with this. Yeah.
Okay. That one's gone.
The second title in
Ray Allen.
Miami was Ray Allen. Yeah. The third title, the one in Cleveland, was because Draymond Green got suspended and Andrew Bogut got hurt. And then the title in the bubble. So LeBron really doesn't have any titles. So I must have.
So he's Karl Malone.
It must have been maybe that's what Dan Sileo was getting at in a prior tweet from the forward-thinking Sileo. But yeah, I mean, look, Larry Bird won a title in 1981. They beat a 40-42 Houston team. They beat him in 6 games. Do you realize Larry Bird scored 8 points in 2 of the games? Like, does anybody bring that up? And Cedric Maxwell was the Finals MVP? No, because he's Larry Bird and he won 3 titles, and that's what he won. You win what you win. I mean, Tom Brady went to 10 Super Bowls, won 7. A player 2 either way, they're 3-7 rather than 7-3. So I mean, it's not like,
or 10
it's not like the Celtics or 10-0 or 1-9. I mean, other than the Kansas City game, they've all been pretty close Super Bowls. No one is bringing up the 86 Celtics or the 87 Lakers, who just breezed through the thing, or the 83 76ers, or the 01 Lakers, who just
21 Nets.
Well, we'll see what happens with that. But the Lakers in 2001 lost 1 game, right? There was game 1 in the finals against Allen Iverson.
Where he just 50. Went bananas. And stepped
over
Ty
Lue. Yeah. So you can go through all of this stuff and say, wow, I mean,
that was ridiculous. I mean, to lose 1 game in the whole thing is insane.
Right. Yeah. And they had the most dominant player and Shaq, and probably at that point, I'd say by 2001, Kobe was ascending to be the best all-around player, because he'd become like a 25 points per game scorer and a great defender. And then they were constructed nicely because they had a lot of other players that they could count on, right? Yeah. They had, at that point, Robert Horry, Rick Fox, really good role players, Derek Fisher, guys that understood their roles. Like I said, with those role players, whether it's today or 20 years ago, you need those guys to be there for you for a quarter or for a half. You don't need these guys to have great games, but they've got to be there in the moments that you call upon them. And the Lakers, getting back to them, this current Lakers team just didn't have that in the postseason. But LeBron deserves a lion's share of the blame. Absolutely. He could have played better. I just don't know how much the ankle impeded him. Is he starting to show age? I don't think he's starting to show age, Jeff, because when he had the ankle injury, he was top 3 in MVP voting, right? I mean, in terms of the polls, I mean, it was him, Embiid, and Joker. Those were the 3 leading MVP candidates. We used to do this every week, rank the MVP candidates. He was right there, ends up getting his ankle, sprained, and it didn't seem to ever be right again.
Yeah, looking at that Lakers run, it's not like they beat crap teams either. They beat good teams. I mean, they beat Portland, swept Portland, swept Sacramento, who was damn good, swept San Antonio.
Yeah, and then, with Duncan and Robinson. It was
ridiculous.
Well, Shaq was at his best at that point. I mean, again, Shaq is one of those guys where the totality of his career, I kind of feel like he underachieved a little bit. Like he wasn't as great a rebounder as he should have been. Talk about a guy who didn't spend the offseason working out. He's just a natural freak and just physically stronger than everyone else. But that was his peak. That's when, mind and body are working together. And now he became a player with so much experience and still had all those physical skills. And then you throw in Kobe. I mean, that was quite a run.
the Spurs were the 1 seed that year. They won 58 games. The Kings were the 3 seed. They won 55 games. Lakers swept both of those teams.
Yeah, no, it was just they were just buzzing through people.
I mean, that's wild.
Yeah, Duncan, Robinson's. I mean, Chris Webber was on that team. Those were good teams, and
Portland was pretty good. They beat in the first round too. I mean, decent.
Portland took them 7 games the year before in the Western Conference Finals. Yeah, the West was strong, and then they got to Philadelphia, which just getting to the finals was an accomplishment. And then Iverson wins Game 1. I'm like, this might be a series. Well, no, the next 4 were handled by the Lakers. I think you could make a case that Lakers team was the best team of this century. I mean, I know people are going to say Golden State in, say, 17 with Durant, Curry, Clay, and Draymond all playing at a high level. But, man, Shaq was a cheat code back then, right? I mean, as great as Durant, Curry, Clay are, you can kind of hope that they have an off-night shooting, right? Because, they're mostly perimeter guys. With Shaq, there was no perimeter game involved. It was just brute force. He was like watching Derrick Henry playing football now, where he gets the ball and he's getting 5 yards a carry, and he's knocking you over and hurting you. That was Shaq. And then let's bring in one of the 10 all-time greatest players who's a great two-way player, and Kobe. And they mixed together because I think they knew the pecking order until a few years later, when then Kobe thought he was a superior player, and that's when the falling out happened. But at that point, I think we were all on board that it was Shaq was the 1 and Kobe was the 1.5. And that's pretty scary.
All right, so let's look at these 2 other interesting teams that just got bounced, Sap, before we finish up here, because I think that the offseason is going to be really interesting, especially for these 2 teams. Portland has some decisions to make. They have Dame Lillard under contract. People aren't sure at this point how happy he is. They just got rid of their coach, Terry Stotts. It's the only coach Dame Lillard has ever played for. CJ McCollum seems to have regressed. The rest of the team's just not good enough. Lillard's obviously good enough, but I don't really know what they do. I don't know if they decide to try to build around Lillard, or if they trade him and try to start over. I, from my perspective, think it's probably best for them to try to start over. I think Lillard's got 2 years left of this type of, maybe. Similar to Kemba Walker, and he's a superior player to Kemba Walker in every way. Small guard, they break down.
He's a little bigger than Kemba, though. I think Kemba's 5'11", 5'11 and a half. I think Dame's maybe 6'1 and a half. So he's a couple inches taller. He's also pretty thick. Like, Dame's strong. So yeah, but I understand your point that the smaller guards don't last into their late 30s. It just doesn't happen. Maybe they can get to their early to mid 30s, and then there's a fall off. Portland has managed to put together a roster without really any wing 3-and-D guys in a league full of wing 3-and-D guys, right? Like, every team has like 3 of those guys. Like, if you're building a roster, you can never have enough of those guys. It's like, if you're building an NFL roster, get me a lot of defensive backs. We're going to need them at some point. There's going to be injuries. We're going to face some great passing attacks. We need a lot of defensive backs. If you're constructing an NBA team, get as many wing 3-and-D guys. Portland doesn't have anybody. I mean, Carmelo's not a wing 3-and-D guy. He doesn't play defense. Covington's a nice player, but, every team has a bunch of these guys. Denver went out and got Aaron Gordon, and they got Michael Porter Jr., so they're set at that position for a couple years. Here's Portland. They're built on a great backcourt and a smallish backcourt, right? Because Dame's about 6'1".
They've been struggling since Lillard came in the league to find a small forward, a wing player. They haven't been able to do it.
But it's almost unfathomable. It's like a football team that can't find defensive backs or wide receivers when there's just a bunch of them out there. Like, go get some.
But do you look at that, Sap, as the bigger issue, that they can't find those complementary 3-and-D players, or that they don't have anybody who's even close to a legitimate 2?
Yeah, because McCollum's not. I thought McCollum eventually could become that, but he's also small. He's 6'3". He's not as consistent as he was in the past. McCollum should be your 3rd or 4th player. And the reason we say this, and it's not necessarily, bashing CJ McCollum, it's just that the teams that are winning championships have 3 great players. And McCollum's not necessarily a great player. Like, a few years ago, you could win with that. You can't now, because to win, you're going to have to beat the Brooklyn Nets, whose 3rd best player is Kyrie freaking Irving. Whether you like him or not, he's far superior to CJ McCollum. Or if the Lakers get their act together, they'll add a 3rd guy to Anthony Davis.
Yeah, McCollum would be a perfect 3rd guy on the Lakers team.
perfect. I mean, and again, the Lakers don't even need a Kyrie Irving level talent as their third guy, because I think their big two is better than anyone else's big two.
McCollum or Middleton would be perfect for the Lakers.
Would be fine on that. Drew Holiday. If Kyle Lowry has anything left in the tank, I mean, he's kind of a smaller guard.
The question is, Sap, then what's Portland do? What direction do you go? I said I'd blow it up, and I know that kills people in Portland because I'm friends with a lot of them. You know, I lived in Oregon for 4 years. I love the Blazers. And they don't want Dame Lillard to go, but I think what's best for the team is I don't know how they build around him. I don't know.
No, I know.
I don't know what they can do.
And again, are you going to get a free agent there? No. I mean, as much as Lillard's respected throughout the league, the players want to go play in Portland, which is a great city, but it's not an easy city to play in, Jet, because of the travel concerns. Market. It's a small market, and you can get through that in the NBA. I mean, Russell Westbrook became one of the most popular players in the league playing in Oklahoma City. I mean, it's a national brand that these guys push, but it's not the easiest place to play in the sense that you're so far away from any other NBA
it's also,
teams. Travel
it's
sucks
getting better, but it's also a very white market.
Oh, of course, yeah. And it's kind of a cool city, right? Like Seattle. Yeah. So it's not like you're going to a racist city. If anything, Portland and Seattle are like
it's very progressive, but it's also very white.
Very white, yeah. And again, the travel, I think, is a problem. If you go, okay, I'm going to go to Portland, like there's really no other team close to me. I'm going to be traveling more than any other team in the league.
Yeah, they travel the most. They do.
They by far. It's. I mean, at least the LA teams have each other, and then the Sacramento within the state. Phoenix is down. It's like Portland's like way far away from everyone. That's okay in the NFL when you only play 8 road games. I mean, in the NBA, play 41 of them. Yeah, they probably could blow it up. What do you get in return for Dame Lillard? I mean, is it draft picks? And then again, whatever team he goes to is going to be pretty good. So those draft picks aren't going to be worth all that much. Is it a young player and draft picks
down the road? I think, Sap, is what you have to. The pick swaps you have to do. You have to sort of be okay with being bad for a little while. They're not going to win. I don't see the mechanism for them to put a championship caliber team around Dame Lillard. I think you could get something of value for McCollum, probably something of value for like Nurkic, but nothing that would equate to putting together a championship team. So if that's the eventual goal, I do feel like you kind of have to go the Oklahoma City route and sort of just start from scratch and accumulate a bunch of picks and trade Lillard to a team that has a short window to contend, and that you hope that, okay, after they're done contending, they suck and we get their picks.
Yeah, and you would think Portland would want to move him to the Eastern Conference. Not that at that point they're going to be even in contention. Just trade him to where you can get the most in return. You know, if you trade him to the Western Conference, by the time you get good, he's probably going to be out of the league. So it's not like you're going to make it to the Western Conference Finals and face Dame Lillard and the LA Lakers, next year. No, it's unfortunate because I think Dame Lillard is one of those guys that probably wants to play his entire career in Portland, right? He loves it there, and they love him. I think you could make a case he's the most popular player in the team's history.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even more so than Clyde Drexler or Bill Walton. I mean, he has that
Drexler
personality.
Left, remember? I mean, he left to go chase the title.
He did.
So, and they love him there, but no, Dame Lillard's the most popular player in team history. It's not close.
Yeah, I mean, and people like the smaller players, don't they? I mean, you just kind of like warm up to the 6'1" guard because you're like, geez, I could meet him and really not be intimidated by him.
Plus, he's so unique in that, I mean, the guy doesn't miss clutch shots. It's incredible.
He's awesome. I mean, imagine him on the Lakers, man. I can only dream.
That's the one team they would never trade him to.
They would never trade him to.
The Blazers hate the Lakers. The fans hate the Lakers. They'd never trade him to the Lakers in a million years.
Let me bring your team into the discussion. The Celtics. What could you give back to Portland? I would assume it starts with Jaylen Brown. Although you don't want to do that. You want to kind of
make you that much better.
Yeah, I mean he's better than Jaylen Brown, but not by leaps and bounds. But
if you're not, unless you're competing for a championship with a trade, then there's no point in trading Jaylen Brown. If it vaults you in the title contention, okay, but just adding Lillard doesn't vault you into title contention.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you add
Lillard
to Brown,
I mean.
No, yeah, because if you add Lillard to Brown and Tatum, now you got something.
Yeah, I think that there is a mechanism to do that. The teams that could acquire Lillard have to have all their draft capital. The Celtics do have all their draft capital, though the problem for Portland would be that Tatum and Brown are still so young. They have a long window. They're not going to be bad. The Celtics, they might be mediocre, but they're not going to be downright bad. And that's what you're hoping to be, is what, when the Celtics traded Garnett and Pierce to Brooklyn, you knew that was a short window until they were going to be really bad. The Celtics, if you trade Lillard to the Celtics, you can get a bunch of draft picks, and you could probably get, maybe Robert Williams, Marcus Smart, to make the money work. Some interesting, Robert Williams is an interesting young player, maybe Nesmith, whatever. But the problem is that the picks, unless you're saying we want your pick in 2040, the Celtics just aren't going to be bad for a while.
Yeah,
they're not going to be
putting Dame Lillard
really
on that team makes them that much better. So the time to do these types of move was years ago, not long ago, but a few years ago, when the Celtics had the Memphis pick or the Sacramento pick, which in theory could have been worth really more. This is what they did to get Kyrie Irving when they traded it to Cleveland. That
I
pick
think
they had, which turned out to be 8th.
The team to me that makes the most sense is Miami. They have they have a good amount of picks. They don't have all of them, but they do have a decent amount of picks. Jimmy Butler is on the back nine, so you know that they're not going to have him for the long haul. They have at least a decent-ish young player in Tyler Hero that you could trade. I could see that them being able to put an intriguing package together. They'd have to include a lot of picks. I'm talking 4+ picks and swaps.
Right.
But I think Miami would be comfortable doing that, saying Butler, Lillard, Adebayo, we can compete for a championship with this team. And Portland would say they probably have about 2 years before they really suck.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And again, Pat Riley's 75 years old, so I don't think he's looking at the slow build, and he's an aggressive guy. Pat Riley probably looks at Brooklyn and says, to beat that team, whether it be in the second or third round of the playoffs next year, if we get there, we're going to need more than we have right now. We're going to need a lot more. I mean, look at Miami, where they've gone. They made it to the finals last year. Then they lose in the first round. They get blown out by Milwaukee, who's now getting blown out by Brooklyn. Now, we know how that works, that not necessarily Miami would have been blown out by Brooklyn, although that's probably the most likely scenario. But you get my point that, teams in the East now, if Brooklyn sails through the East and wins the title, they're all going to get in some sort of panic mode, right? Like Philly's going to get in a panic mode. Right. Milwaukee, Miami, the Celtics, are all going to say, we got to do something drastic here. We can't just tweak the roster. We got to make a big move. And Dame Lillard would be one of the most attractive, if not the most attractive player to trade. The only way that you can keep Dame in Portland and maybe contend is if, again, goes back to the scenario of the disgruntled superstar who just wants out of a place and has 2 years left on his contract, a la James Harden earlier this year. And maybe you make that move. That's why I think so many teams right now are looking and saying, why the hell didn't we jump into the James Harden sweepstakes? Like stupid. Miami, I'm sure, is saying that. The Celtics should be saying that. Anybody, because he was signed for 2 more years, the current year and next year. So it's not like, it was imminent coming at the end of this year.
Well, Miami really should have done it, because they wouldn't have had to give up one of their 2 stars anyways. They just would have had to give up some of their younger players. I mean, the Celtics would have had to give up Jaylen Brown. So while in retrospect, it doesn't seem that smart, at least I understand it from their perspective. We're giving up one of our 2 best players. Miami was giving up, really not all that much. So I think that was pretty foolish.
Here's the thing about Danny Ainge's draft mishaps, that those players never became good enough to even want to trade, like that anybody would want. Like, who wants Grant Williams?
No one.
Or Romeo Langford. I mean, maybe Nesmith can be something. Whereas with Miami, they drafted Tyler Hero, and maybe they can move him. So that's the idea of this. Kind of how the Celtics got Garnett. Like, you get these young players, Al Jefferson, et cetera, and they show some promise, and now you move them for a star. The Lakers did this with Brandon Ingram, right? Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball were the 2 main components going to New Orleans, along with Josh Hart, to get back Anthony Davis. So, the Celtics don't have that. So Celtics have Jason Tatum, who looks like he's going to be a top 10 player, within the next couple of years. Jaylen Brown, who I think can certainly be a top 20 player. And then the fall off from there is a lot. And then you've got the worst contract in the NBA in Kemba Walker. So I don't know what the Celtics do. Good luck.
What about this one, Sap? Ben Simmons for Dame Lillard. Straight up.
That's an interesting one. That's interesting.
No picks, no nothing, just straight up.
Straight up, mano a mano. I mean, the contracts would probably work, right? They're both pretty much max players. That's intriguing. That really is, because again, Philadelphia and Portland at the end of the season, if Brooklyn does what you expect them to do, I don't necessarily, but if Brooklyn goes 16-3 in the postseason, and you got Durant, Kyrie, and Harden still pretty much in their prime, every team in the league is going to say, we got to do something here. We just can't roll it back. Man, Dame and Embiid would be an interesting duo, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think, that it makes them better because Lillard's game complements Embiid's game better because, I mean, he can hit threes and Simmons can't. And for Portland, you can legitimately try to build around a younger player in Ben Simmons. Yep. So I think it's intriguing for them. Less pressure in Portland, too, for Ben Simmons. Maybe it fits his vibe a little bit more.
Yeah.
Playing on the West Coast. Maybe he wants to be the guy, being the focal point of that team. Maybe he'd like that.
That's intriguing.
It could work. Daryl Morey is the type of GM I think that would take a swing like that.
Sure.
And you'd be punting, you'd be closing your window a little bit, but making it in terms of years, but maybe giving you a better chance. I do think Lillard and Embiid are good enough to be able to at least take it to Brooklyn and make it more of a competitive series. Now, I think they'd have a 2-year shot at it. But for a team like Philadelphia that hasn't won a championship since 1983? Was that when they won the title?
83 was the last championship. Yeah, only been to the finals one more time.
I think it's worth it to make that move, especially considering you don't know how long Embiid's going to be able to hold up for. I think that's a concern too. He could have one devastating injury and he's done. We've seen it happen with big men before. So I kind of take this shot, especially if, I think, Brooklyn just looks like this behemoth that nobody could take down. I kind of feel like it would be worth it. I think it's a mutually beneficial trade. So that's one to just throw that out there.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, my crazy Celtics trade, which I know we're not really talking about the Celtics, but what the hell, why not? This, you may laugh at this. You may think I'm insane, which, is something we both agree that I am. But what about you get Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook from Washington in exchange for Kemba, Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, and draft picks? I think the contracts would work. They wouldn't do it.
No.
Yeah, I mean, Kemba Walker is he's untradeable. If you move him, you're going to have to eat part of his contract and give the other team draft picks to take it on. I mean,
it'd be a great trade for the Celtics, but Washington wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I'm just, because and then throwing in the draft picks. I mean, I think the only way they get Bradley Beal is they're going to have to trade Jaylen Brown, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of it.
They're in that tough spot of they need to figure out how to add to Brown and Tatum without moving Brown or Tatum.
Yeah, it's a tough position. And again, it all goes back to the fact that they don't have those other players that these other teams have.
Yeah, and the Lakers are in a similar spot, but just better because one, LA you can recruit, and two, their big two are better than the Celtics' big two. So.
Right, yeah, because who's anybody on the Lakers of value outside of LeBron and Anthony Davis? Like Schroeder's going to free agency.
Horton Tucker, I think, might have, but it's not enough to get an all-star level player.
No, you're not packaging him as the key guy in a trade. So it's going to be interesting.
Kuzma might be playing in China in a year. So I mean, he is shot.
Oh, man, he is just pathetic.
Remember when there was Laker fans were trying to say he was better than Jason Tatum?
Yeah, I don't know where they were or what they were watching. I mean, yeah, when they first broke into the league, he was also coming off of playing 4 years in college. So in theory, he was pretty much entering his prime. And Jason Tatum, did he have a driver's license when he came into the NBA? He couldn't drink.
No, he's 18 years old.
We've seen what Jason Tatum's developed into, and Kuzma came in and has gotten worse. So yeah, he's pathetic. I mean, he doesn't have a discernible skill. Like some guys don't do a lot out there, but they're like Joe Harris is a phenomenal shooter.
He's becoming a fringy NBA player, not a fringy starter, fringy NBA player.
Yeah, like a guy who should be the 8th guy on your roster. And again, he's tough to deal with because he's got a personality. He's dated like beautiful women in LA. He's built some sort of brand. He's a decent looking guy, changes his hair color. So it's not like the traditional 8th or 9th guy on your team that no one really knows about. Again, in the NBA, this does happen because the 8th or 9th guy on a roster,
especially on the Lakers,
you're on the Lakers or you're on a high-profile team. People know about you. You'll have 1 million followers on Twitter. Meanwhile, a star wide receiver or a great tight end in the NFL doesn't have that many. It's just the way the nature of the beast.
Certainly
is.
Not a star baseball player.
No, I mean, does Fernando Tatis even have Twitter yet? I hope he does, because he's fun. He's exciting. But Mike Trout, like, is the best player in the league, and I'm sure he has several million, but nothing approaching. LeBron has like 70 million followers on just Twitter.
Thought when they made the Anthony Davis trade, I thought the Pelicans were dumb to not get Kuzma involved in the trade, and instead they took Josh Hart, who's a better player than Kyle Kuzma. I mean, they nailed it. I mean, he's not an amazing player, but he's better than Kyle Kuzma.
He's competitive as all hell. And that's something, again, like I said, you have to have one skill. Like, you love Marcus Smart. I'm not as big a fan, but at least the guy, he competes and he plays defense, right? So that's two things that he has going for him. Like, what does Kyle Kuzma do? He's not a good defensive player. In fact, he's pretty bad. He's a streaky shooter. And streaky in a case of his ceiling is, okay, he'll hit like league average, and his floor is he'll not hit any shots. Like, streaky guys to me are guys that when they're hot, they're going to hit 45% of their threes, not 30% of their threes. Like, he has no skill, and his opinion of himself is way higher than what it should be. You know, he's all of a sudden become some sort of spokesman for the Lakers, which makes no sense.
I don't know. Well,
yeah, so,
I think it's going to be fascinating offseason, Sep, and we're going to talk about the Mavericks before we finish this up. But just because I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are desperate, like Philadelphia, Boston, Miami. It's appearing that Milwaukee's going to be in that camp too. The Lakers, the Blazers are going to have to do some sort of overhaul. Depending on what happens with the Jazz and the Suns, they might be looking to add another, one more piece to try to put them over the top. The Warriors are going to be in the mix next year because Klay Thompson presumably will be back. Do they look to package their pick that should be high this year because it's coming from Minnesota probably, and Wiseman to get another star? I think it's going to be really interesting offseason, because there's going to be a lot of teams that are like, we're close. We need to make another move here, or we're too far. We need to blow it up.
You didn't even mention the Atlanta Hawks, and they're a team that could get to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they got a transcendent player in Trae Young. They may look and say, this is a market that we should be able to recruit free agents or make deals for players. They may say we got to make that move to get to the next level. And maybe now New York is in play as a destination for free agents. Although I still don't buy into that, because I don't know if Tom Thibodeau is the coach you want to go play for. I think he just won Coach of the Year. Congratulations. But if I'm a star player, I don't know if I like the 2-hour practices and the coach who apparently hasn't smiled since 2008.
Yeah, so, I think, but it should be interesting, right? So the last team we'll talk about then is the Mavericks, who went to 7 games with the Clippers, and basically were carried by just Luka Doncic. He just got no help. Porzingis has been taking a beating. He's unhappy with his role, which, I mean, I don't know how you could be unhappy with your role. The guy who's number 1 is a much better player than you, and you sucked as the number 2. So do you really want to be the number 1 on a team? So Dallas, fortunately for them, Doncic is happy there. They know how to, treat the European players. They have a lot of experience with it. It's a nice place to live. Mark Cuban's a great owner. So I don't think they have any flight concerns for Doncic. But they need to get him some help, because the roster is it's not very good. They were relying too much on guys like Tim Hardaway to have really good games. And he's a fine player, but to be your 3rd best player, that's just not viable. Doncic is good enough right now to be the best player in a championship team.
Oh, yeah.
So they need to. Dirk only won 1 title. I think that the expectation is Doncic should win a couple, but you need to put the pieces around him. Mark Cuban will spend the money. I also, similar to Portland, don't know what the mechanism is for Dallas to try to trade for a star, because they don't have good pieces to trade.
They don't, right? I mean, Porzingis is making $30 million a year. He doesn't rebound. He does seem to be out of position there, and maybe that falls on Rick Carlisle. Look, Rick Carlisle is an outstanding coach, or at least was an outstanding coach. I think he's kind of out of the Thibodeau hard-ass role, which can work for a short period of time. I don't know if Doncic really embraces Rick Carlisle. So that can be an issue, because if that's the case, then Carlisle's gone and Doncic
certainly
stays.
Got a lot out of Doncic so far. So I mean,
he sure has. With Porzingis is now talking about that. He's being asked to be someone who creates space out there. Like 7'3", the guy doesn't rebound much. He doesn't post up. He doesn't rim protect. I mean, like, he might as well be 6'3" rather than 7'3", and he's had so many injury concerns. And then you got Tim Hardaway Sr. coming out, and he's just a loose cannon.
Junior.
Not that he
if it was
plays.
senior, it might be better.
No, it is senior, saying that
he's senior.
No, he's junior. But the father came out, who again remember Tim Hardaway Sr. 15 years ago had a massive amount of issues with gay people, like he wouldn't allow one in his locker room, and he couldn't deal with it. He now comes out and says, well, when Dallas made the trade with the Knicks, it was because they wanted to bring in Tim Hardaway Jr. and that Porzingis was a throw-in, which makes
I didn't
no
hear
sense.
that, but that's very stupid
at that time. But that's stupid. But that kind of fits in. Now you get this kind of loose cannon dad deciding to get involved with this, and I love Mark Cuban, but what is he going to do here? Again, that's another place that they don't really recruit free agents when you think they could. No state income tax, pretty good team. They've got an all-time great. I think this kid can be an all-time great player. Okay, I mean, he's
no reason why not.
3 years. He's 22 years old. He's phenomenal. I think he's also someone that should maybe do what I'm recommending Anthony Davis do in the offseason and work on his conditioning. I mean, that's saying a lot for a guy who just puts up ridiculous numbers. He does have a tendency to tail off a little bit in the fourth quarter, and we see he also struggles at the free throw line, and his shooting goes down a bit in the fourth quarter, which is common, but I think a lot of that has to do with lack of conditioning. He's still a baby. He's 22 years old, although he has a lot of mileage on him. He started playing professionally, at 15? He's going to be an all-time great. This is the guy I actually look at and say he could crack the top 10 all time. He's got that type of ability. Now he's got to start winning. And again, he's only been in the league 3 years. I don't know what the Dallas Mavericks do. I mean, I'm sure in a perfect world, Dallas would be interested in Dame Lillard, but how do you do that? What do you offer?
The problem
Portland?
is the draft picks, you can offer a boatload of draft picks, but because he's so young, Doncic, they're not going to be good picks for 15 years. So that's the difficult part. Again, when you go back to the KG Pierce trade to Brooklyn, the reason the Celtics made that trade is because they knew it was a very, very short period of time before Brooklyn was going to be bad.
Exactly. So, this is a tough spot Dallas is in. And again, they're a great
even
team
Houston,
to watch.
Sap, who traded Harden to the Nets, I think they knew it's not going to be too long before Brooklyn is going to be, not what they are now, because either those guys will flake, which very likely, or, Harden is just exiting the prime of his career.
Right.
And, Durant has injury concerns. Kyrie has injury concerns. Kyrie could retire tomorrow for all I know. So I think that was a safe bet that those picks could be valuable. But if you're getting picks from Boston or Dallas, they have young stars. They're not going to be, they may not win a championship, but they're not going to be lottery picks.
The Celtics had an awful year this year, and they're going to most likely be the 16th pick in the first round. Right, dead in the middle there. That doesn't help you. Now, in theory, they should be better next year, so those picks will be in the low 20s. And then if you acquire a player for those picks, then the picks get even less valuable for the team that traded the player to Boston. So, and Dallas is in a tough spot. You're not going to have the draft capital. You just maybe have to get lucky. Like, there are players that have been drafted late in the first round. I use Jimmy Butler as an example.
Yeah.
But it's so difficult to build a roster like that anymore. Like, I go back to the Pistons even before your time when the Pistons won back-to-back championships. The roster was constructed around Isaiah Thomas, but they did such a great job drafting John Sally, Dennis Rodman, Joe Dumars. They drafted those guys, middle of the first round, and in the case of Dennis Rodman in the second round. That just doesn't happen anymore. It's such a crapshoot, the draft, because most of these players play 1 year. You don't have a lot of intel on them, and unless you get those really high picks, it's really a crapshoot. So, who goes to Dallas? Again, I sound like a broken record, Jet. You just got to hope that the disgruntled superstar wants out. But then again, if the disgruntled superstar wants out, the team then says, okay, we got to trade the guy. We're getting back draft picks, but that team's going to be good because we just traded an all-star player, like what happened in Brooklyn. But the case in Brooklyn is those players are older. So in theory, those draft picks may not be bad for Houston 5, 6, 7
older
years
and crazy.
Older and crazy. Yeah. I mean, it's not like LeBron's involved, not LeBron now, but say LeBron 3 years ago when he's invested. Those guys, yeah. I mean,
you look for when you're getting picks, you're looking for the potential of instability, basically.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. And that's not the case. Dallas and Boston with those young stars, it's a near impossibility. They're not going to at least be good.
No. So what Dallas needs to do is, like you said, get lucky, or if somebody goes to free agency, put on the full press pitch of a lifetime. Like,
Right.
and bring out all the stops. Like when the Celtics borrowed Tom Brady to try to recruit Kevin Durant. Pull out every stop you possibly can,
And
get
Kelly
another star to
Olynyk.
join.
Kelly
Yeah,
Olynyk. Don't forget he was there too.
That may have ruined the whole thing, honestly. So yeah, it's tough for Dallas. I mean, you got this potentially all-time great player, but you don't have anything else around him that's valuable.
No, I mean, can you make a case that the gap between the best player and the second best player on Dallas is the widest of any team in the league?
Yeah, you certainly could. I don't know another team that would even come close.
I mean, Milwaukee, you got Giannis, but I mean, like Drew Holiday and Middleton
are far better than Porzingis.
Anybody on Dallas, right? I mean, go from there. Kawhi's got Paul George, and he's got his flaws, but Paul George is much better than Porzingis. I mean, Brooklyn, let's not even put them into discussion because they've got 3 studs. Yeah, I mean, look, the Celtics, as flawed as they are, Jason Tatum has Jaylen Brown. Dame Lillard, CJ McCollum's better than Porzingis. I also think that Luka right now is one of the 5 best players in the world.
Golden State with this season,
but Klay Thompson's coming back. And look, give me Draymond Green over Porzingis 7 days a week.
Yeah, at least he has some skills, like a skill set that helps.
He's going to defend. He's going to pass. He's going to rebound. He's lost his shooting touch for whatever reason. And he's also a leader, right? I mean, look, Andrew Wiggins is better than Porzingis.
Yeah, Porzingis.
Not saying much.
Porzingis stinks.
The whole weekend we were away, and I'm rooting for Dallas in Game 6, and we were watching the fourth quarter. Going into the fourth quarter, Dallas had a 7-point lead in Game 6. Looked like they were going to be able to, get over the hump. And I was just like screaming at the TV about Porzingis to the point where all the other guys just couldn't stop laughing. They're like, "Boy, you really don't like him." I look, he's 7'3", got like 4 rebounds that night. You're 7'3" by accident. You should get 8 rebounds.
He averaged 13 points a game in that series.
Oh.
He averaged 13 games and 5 rebounds.
5 rebounds. That's like something your 7th guy should average. And the other thing, there was one point in Game 7 when the Clippers were starting to take hold of the series and the game, obviously, and it was a 2-on-1, and he pulled up from 28 feet to take a 3-pointer. And I just remember, I love Jeff Van Gundy, and he's just like, a 2-on-1 with a 7'3" guy, a pull-up 28-footer is the best you could do?
I kind of feel like he doesn't know how to play basketball.
I don't think
he's
he
just
does.
Like
he's
really tall and has some skills. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, Phil Jackson drafted him and he played for the Knicks, so maybe the stink of that still is there with him.
Ruined him
to the point where he's. And again, maybe Rick Carlisle's not the right coach there. And again, if Luka doesn't embrace Carlisle, and if Luka decides to go in to talk to Mark Cuban, then Rick Carlisle is gone.
Sep, all it takes is, one team to think that, he's not old. I think he's 25, Porzingis.
Right, but he's had a ton of injuries.
No, he has. So, but I'm saying all it takes is one team to believe in him, and then you have some trade value, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that would
This isn't going to work. He can't stay on the team. No. It's not going to work.
No, and
they're not complementary players. They're just they're not.
No, and man, Luka, though, just watch the guy play. He's just. And I think it was Mark Jackson said it on Sunday. He's always compared to Larry Bird because he's white. And there's some elements of his game that are similar to Bird. He's not as good a shooter as Bird. I mean, he can hit 3-pointers and get hot from there. He's a disaster at the free throw line. I think that has to do with conditioning with Luka because he's got a nice looking shot. So that's the thing he has to embrace now is in the offseason, work your ass off. And sometimes it's unfortunate that players don't realize that till they're older. Like at 22, here's a guy who's about to sign a huge contract, good-looking dude. I'm sure he's having the time of his life in Dallas or wherever he spends the offseason. Is he going to be committed to conditioning? Sometimes it doesn't hit you till later in your career when you start to lose some of that skill set. So that's going to be important for him.
Do you think it's also partially because he looks at the roster and goes, we're not competing for a championship with this team. Why am I going to bust my ass even further when we're going to, even if I play amazing, which he did in every game this series, basically, we're going to lose the first round.
He had 46 points and 14 assists in Game 7. Like, that's historic.
couldn't ask
And they
any
got
more of
blown out.
him.
And they
couldn't
got
ask any
blown
more of
out.
him.
No. I mean, how many assists would he get if he had like good players around him? You know, to get assists, you need someone to hit a shot. It's not like, you know, you make a nice pass and get credit for it if they don't put it in the basket. I mean,
Sap, the series he averaged almost 38 points a game, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds.
That's crazy. I mean, that's stuff LeBron was doing on a yearly basis, right? Not even the 38 points. That's just kind of silly. I mean, the league is different than, say, 10, 12 years ago, but those are the type of numbers we'd see LeBron put up. And LeBron, I think, has embraced him as the heir apparent. We had this discussion before. I don't know if Luka can be the face of the franchise because he's not American. But he has a personality. And that's something that's
he's also kind of a dick, which I like.
He's kind of a dick. Yeah. Oh, he's definitely a dick.
On the court.
He's laughing at the Clippers. Yeah, absolutely. And he's got like the hot mother. You ever see her? She's like 42.
Yeah, she's very pretty.
I mean, he's got sex appeal more than, say, Giannis. And Giannis is someone who just like works so hard. But I think he has a limited game. And again, I think he struggles with the English language. I think Luka's more comfortable speaking English than Giannis. So if I had to pick one of those two be the future face of the franchise of the league, it would be Luka. I still think Zion's going to be the future face of this league.
Got to get to the playoffs first.
Got to eventually get to the playoffs because that's where most people, get tuned in.
Because look, we haven't talked about him in weeks. This is what happens.
No,
out of sight, out of mind.
You gotta be there. You gotta be in the playoffs. I mean, you and I watch all year long, but we're psychos. But the average person out there is engaged in the playoffs, and Zion hasn't been to them. He's got to find a way to get there and be better. I think he has all of those other things you need to be the face of the league. The smile, the looks, the powerful game, the almost cartoonish physique and game itself. I think he's the heir apparent. It's not Durant or Harden or any of those guys. They just don't seem, it's too late for them. And Durant can't be the face of the league. I mean, he's a dick. I mean, he's snapping at reporters. No, really. I mean, the face of the league has to be accommodating. And LeBron, for the most part, over the years has been really good with the press, and they've been good with him. Yeah. Durant's, that ship sailed. He could be the best player in the league, but he can't be the face of the league. He's already 32, and he's kind of a sour puss at times. Yeah. So I think Luka could be that guy. Because he's got a bigger personality than even Dirk didn't really have a great personality. He was just, again, he was also the first, like one of the first foreign players that was that great. Luka's coming in, and he's kind of got that. He's got a lot of swag, and that's why I like him so much. Yeah, weir's kind of a cool number too, right? 77.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's a random
weird number, but it's kind of like
he's gonna make it popular.
He will.
It's a hockey number.
A lot of
That's
t-shirts.
what it is. It's a
hockey number. Yeah.
Well, maybe he likes hockey. He did grow up in the area.
Does he smoke cigarettes on the court?
Probably,
I just picture Luka on the sideline. He's got to work on conditioning. Here I am at 5'9",
it's the Vlade Divac method.
Pounds. Yeah, but that's it. And I hope what happens with some of these guys is at the end of the career. Like I think Carmelo's saying that right now. Is like, damn, if I just spent more time conditioning early in my career, how much better I could have been.
Because never in good shape. Carmelo was never in good shape.
And even Paul Pierce at some point, but Paul Pierce played like an old man game, so be it. And in some sense, Carmelo did too. But Carmelo now is probably in the best shape he's ever been in. And that's where the all-time greats have it over everyone. They work so hard in the offseason. The Bird, Magic, LeBron, Michael, Kobe, those guys, they're just wired differently. Yeah. But I think if Luka really does that, man, the sky's the limit for that young man.
All right, Sap. Well, you did your postmortem on the Lakers. We talked about some teams that are eliminated now. I think it's going to be a really interesting offseason, but we still have plenty more playoffs to go before we can talk about that. And we will be with you the rest of the week talking about the playoffs, giving you our picks and stuff. So make sure you stick right here. We are the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our Twitter pages at JohnSap25, JOHNSAP25, or at Jet Striar, JETSTRIAR. And we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.